you must have seen those charts that show sort of societal level happiness.
Mm.
I mean, the women's one is the most extreme one. I mean, they've gone from basically being happy pre-war to incredibly unhappy. But I mean, it's happening to everybody.
So women are experiencing far higher levels of unhappiness than men.
Self-reported happiness. I mean, it's declined for everybody in the West, but women most especially.
That's very interesting, because I think they're more susceptible to the men, as a generalization, more susceptible than men to what's happening in the collective. So if the collective is unhappy.
Well, I suppose that also, and the fact that, I mean, we must be a similar age, but the messaging that I remember being put out to women when we were young was very much, if you are if you're a stay-at-home mum, that means you're a failure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you must get out there into the workforce and strap yourself into an office chair.
Yes.
And spend the next 30 years there.
Otherwise, you're a waster.
Yeah,
and you failed the sisterhood.
Exactly. And I kind of just internalized this because it was the universal messaging. And we didn't have YouTube back in those days. We just had, the message that came through media and schools and all the rest of it. And so I believed it myself. And then I noticed as I went through my career, the women just started dropping off.
Yeah.
And I'd be kind of surprised and say, why are you doing this? You got a great job. And it was like, yeah, but I don't want to do this. It doesn't make me happy. At the moment they have a kid, they're just off.
Yes.
They don't want to come back.
Yes. It's interesting. As far back as 2015, I was in Malaysia, which is it's a Muslim country, Muslim government. And one of my friends, we met in a shopping mall, and she was very upset and she was crying. We'd had a long conversation, and she started crying. And I said, what is it? And she said, all I want is to be a mother and have children. I said, you're a 28-year-old Muslim girl in a Muslim country. Of course you can do that. She said, I can't. My mother's a lecturer in feminism. And I was like, this poison, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And yeah.
I mean, but from my point of view, Islam has a limited number of appeal points, but its total repudiation of feminism is definitely one of them.
Well, and if they can't hold it back, I would just say, who's got the strongest ideology?
Yeah.
Because what I would say, so I lived in the East for maybe a total of 4 years, Thailand, mainly in Malaysia. And I would come back and people would say things like, oh, in the West, it's like this, and in the East, it's like that. And I would say, no, the East is the West. If they have Wi-Fi, Instagram, and they know who the Kardashians are, they're in the West. They're in the West. And they go, well, but it's a Muslim country. And I'm like, what do you think is happening in Muslim countries in the Middle East to the Far East? It's all going this way. The predominant ideology, and it's back to economics again, is really downstream of capitalism. It's consumer capitalism.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, to build on your point there, I think what's happened is, so I talked about the happiness levels.
Yeah.
If you go back pre-war, and there were surveys done at the time that asked people, what is your highest ideals in life? And making money was very low down the list. So I think the surveys I've seen, they gave you the top 10. And making money was on the list, but it was like 9th or 10th, right down the bottom. And at the top, it was things like basically live a rewarding life, garner respect in my community. It was all community orientated goals were right at the top, and money was at the bottom. And if you look at it, those same surveys today, it's flipped the other way around. Now it's being a upstanding member of your community. I don't think it even makes the top 10 anymore. If it is, it's right at the bottom, and making money has gone right to the top.
That's really interesting and really depressing. And if you could send me some of these to look at afterwards, I'd be really grateful. So this is where I really need an economist phrase kicks in. I've got a grasp of psychology. I can bluff my way in philosophy, but then I just have this strong sense that what's happening psychologically, philosophically, meaning people's worldview, just the world, the way they see the world, philosophy at that level, like a moral code, is influenced by factors that we're not talking about. So what's on stage is childhood trauma and microaggressions and issues around identity politics. That's on stage right now. Okay, fine. And then I look and I go, but the microaggressions, the woke, the identity politics. I'm like, isn't that fundamentally economic? Because you have to be quite wealthy. You have to have quite a lot of disposable wealth to be wringing your hands.
The whole luxury belief things.
It's a luxury belief thing, isn't it?
Well, let me build out that point about the change in economics behaviour, sort of pre-war and post-war.
Yeah,
I think I can explain that. A lot of the economics stuff drives essentially from demographic change is a huge one, and by that I don't just mean people. Well, the demographic change that came from immigration is a later effect, but basically the size of populations is a huge factor in this.
Yes,
I'll explain what I mean by that. The other one is the introduction of the fiat money system post-war, which turned money from being something scarce to money being something which was abundant. And when money becomes abundant, everything else becomes scarce.
I thought we were fiat before the Second World War.
Well, yeah. So I think in 1913, 15, something like that, the UK came off the gold standard.
Okay.
I mean, it'd done this a couple of times. It came off and then went back on again. But in the early days, it was a fairly muted effect, and the dollar was still on the gold standard. And since the dollar was the dominant currency, that kind of set the tone of things. Post-war, I mean, what happened in the war is all the gold ended up going to America.
Okay.
Partly as a function of the fact that everybody else was fighting a massive war and they were still producing stuff that we needed, so they earned it. But also, people just sent it there for safekeeping because, if you're France and you think things might get a bit dicey, the first thing you do is you send all your gold over to America, where it's comfortably out of the way. We got to the end of the war, and somebody, probably an American, thought, maybe we should hang on to this. And so they needed to come up with a justification why they needed to hang on to all of the gold.
Right.
And the explanation given was, okay, well, we've got a large, powerful navy now. What we will do is we will hold on to the gold. We will protect international shipping. So the whole rationale for all of this is protecting international shipping and trade and stuff. The dollar can be the global currency, and the dollar will be pegged to gold.
So is this the beginning of the Team America World Police scenario?
Yes.
Where, because I found out when I was living in Asia, the Asian security and the prevention of war is an American mission.
There's naval bases all over Asia.
And if we pulled them out, it was like, China would just take everything. I was like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had literally no idea at all. So that comes from the opportunity they saw post-World War to move people to a fiat currency.
If you've got a whole bunch of gold, if you've got most of the world's gold, you don't want to give it back.
Sure.
And they didn't.
Sure.
So we then went on this, the dollar became the global currency system, pegged to gold. And that works perfectly fine, pegging to gold, as long as you behave like you're pegged to gold.
Okay.
Which basically means you don't spend more than you earn.
Right. Because there's only so much in the vault.
Yes. First thing they did, started spending more than they earned. So that was a problem, and so they kept on creating new dollars because they were spending more than they earned, and they needed to make up the difference.
Sorry, just for fiat currency. Some people might not know what it is.
Paper money.
Promissory, isn't it?
Money which is backed by the promises of politicians.
Sounds like a great... what could go wrong?
Exactly.
What could possibly go wrong?
So they started spending more, and so they created more dollars in order to finance this spending. And then people started to get a tiny bit suspicious that the dollar was not, in fact, backed by gold in the way that they said it was. And it was the French who went first. The French said, I think you guys are flagging it. We take our gold back. So they started their gold back. And of course, once one country does it, everybody's like, okay, there's an issue here. And Nixon in 72 or 73, I think it was 73, he basically realized that he had no choice apart from unpegging it and making the dollar a purely paper fiat system.
Right.
The morning after he did that, surprise announcement, markets absolutely shot up.
Okay.
Which might seem counterintuitive, but the reason they did that is because stocks are things divided by pieces of paper, and the president has just said, I'm removing the only cap on the amount of pieces of paper that I can generate.
Right.
So therefore, everything which is a thing now needs to get redenominated by a larger number.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the unit denomination of these things has to go up.
Right.
And that created a system where, basically the amount of money would expand. The mechanism,
Yeah.
I'll just finish this.
Yes, yeah.
I rolled out the whole mechanism. The mechanism of that is you take on debt.
Mm.
So you take on debt, which creates more money.
Mm.
But if you start creating debt in order to create more money, well, you've got a problem then, because debt comes with interest.
Mm.
So even if you pay off the loan, well, where does the interest come from?
Mm.
That money does not exist in the world.
Mm.
So therefore, how do you pay off interest? Well, you create more debt. So the amount of debt must always expand. The amount of money must always expand.
Yes.
And you get in a situation where you get this continual growing bubble.
Yes.
And what that basically means is you put that on a compound rate.
Mm.
And what you find is that money becomes increasingly abundant.
Mm.
Whereas pre-war, money was relatively scarce, but things were abundant.
Mm.
And things were competing to get the money.
Mm.
But in that system, it's a lot easier. I mean, well, you know what it was like. Speaking of your grandparents, you know, they would go out at 14, get an electrical apprenticeship, and on the way back from securing that, they would go and buy a house and get married and all the rest of it. Whereas these days, you can be a 37-year-old lawyer and really struggling to get your first house.
Yes.
Because money has become so abundant that it doesn't really have that much value anymore, whereas things do.
Mm.
So people have had to shift into basically a scarcity mindset, which means they desperately need to accumulate more and more of this melting ice cube, which is fiat money. So that I think is driving the phenomenon that you talked about just before I got into all of this, which people have to do this.
Okay, scarcity mindset. I definitely need to ask you more about that. Was there ever a chance, say we go back to 1972 and Nixon is having a conversation with, 8 people who are advising him. Was there ever a chance that this wouldn't completely ruin the system? Was there any way that it wouldn't, that he wasn't signing? It's a death certificate, right? There's no way out of that.
Yeah, well, as long as you keep the game going, it works.
So, okay, so if you were to say to me, what do the policies look like of the UK, of USA, of the modern Western liberal democratic countries, so-called, as far as the long-term plan goes? And I've always thought that I don't think there is a long-term plan. I think they're kicking a can down the road and just praying that the next person who comes into power deals with it.
Oh, it's very much that, yeah. So, I mean, in answer to the point, was it obvious immediately that this was going to lead to ruin? Yes, it was. And a whole...
they knew straight away. There was no surprise.
Yeah. And there was a whole bunch of people who understood it and immediately packed up for the hills. They loaded up their what do the Americans call it, station wagons or whatever it is. They loaded up their station wagon with tins of beans, shotguns, and drove off into the woods waiting for the collapse.
Yeah.
Now, that was in like the mid-70s.
Yeah.
And they're still waiting.
Yeah.
So it is, in fact, I also had this the other day. I mean, James Delingpole got in touch with me because he was a bit worried because his son's going to university and he's apparently sharing a dorm with some guy who's doing finance and is very, very good on the math stuff. And he started crunching the numbers and he was like, this system is going to collapse. There's mathematically no other solution than this thing going to collapse. And James was asking me about it. And I was like, yeah, that is the case. But it's been the case since the mid-1970s.
So we are.
It's a mathematical certainty that it will collapse.
But we're just doing it in slow motion.
But as long as you can keep the plates spinning, and you can keep adding more plates. So if you ever go to Cirque du Soleil or something, and they do the plate spinning, they're incredibly good at it. And you sit there as the audience member thinking, oh, they're definitely going to drop one in a minute, and they just get another plate, and they get another plate, and they keep doing it. But it is a mathematical certainty that if they didn't at some point stop that and move on to the next act of, trapeziums or whatever the hell it was, that one person would not be able to grow forever with the amount of plates that they could spin. I mean, at some point, there would just be hundreds of them and they couldn't possibly do it.
Yes.
That's the financial system that we're in.
And I suppose at some level it's physics, isn't it? It has to have a limitation. It has to have a point at which it just bursts. So then, I don't want to digress too far, but it just occurred to me, if you're running a system politically, and you can see you're at I don't know, you're voted into power tomorrow, and they take you into a room. Let's imagine where it's like the room out here that controls what's happening here. You can see in real time the numbers moving, and you have your hands physically on levers of power that don't exist, but in this metaphor they do. I wonder what that does to people's their commitment to the job. Is this why we have so much political degeneracy? Because they know we ain't going anywhere. It can't last. I wonder if that creates this sort of nihilism.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.